All right. And we'll wait a moment while we let more people join in.
When do you tell us that we're live? Just when you disappear?
You are live.
Oh, really?
Right now.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. Well, I think we should kick off then if we're live.
Well, in that sense, I'll just go ahead and get started. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another PNP Live. My name is Bashan. I am part of the event staff with Politics and Prose. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Before we get started with our event, just a couple quick items. We first ask that if you would like to ask a question of either of our authors, you would place it into the Q&A box. That way, when it's time for question and answer, we can kind of keep everything organized and facilitate that pretty easily. In addition to that, you can go to the chat section throughout the event where you can find a link, which will take you directly to the Politics and Prose website, where you'll be able to purchase a copy of The Wrong End of the Telescope. We, of course, highly encourage you to do so, and we thank you for any patronage, as that helps us to continue to bring these events. Rabih Alameddie is the author of the novels The Angel of History, An Unnecessary Woman, The Hakawati, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, The Divine Kool-Aids in the Story Collection, The Purge. In 2019, he won the Dos Passos Prize. Mr. Alameddie will be in conversation with Ms. Aminatta Forna, who is the author of several novels herself, including Ancestor Stones, The Memory of Love, The Hired Man, and Happiness, as well as the essay collection, The Window Seat, and memoir, The Devil That Danced on the Water. Ms. Forna's books have been translated into 22 languages. She is currently the director and Lannan Foundation Chair of Poetics at Lannan Center for Poetics and Social Practice at Georgetown University. Without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Welcome, everybody, to this Politics and Prose special event with Rabih Alameddie. And also welcome to you, Rabih, in more ways than one, because you just moved from the West Coast to the East Coast. So we are both living in Virginia. Yes. And of course, I moved from the UK. So here we are, we've landed in Virginia. How are you finding it here?
Hot and lots of mosquitoes. Lots and lots and lots of mosquitoes.
You're in Charlottesville.
Yes, yes. And I do think that mosquitoes here in Virginia are devious and insidious. I don't see them, but I'm covered in mosquito bites.
And they are somehow worse than the mosquitoes in Lebanon.
Oh, definitely. In Lebanon, I see them. I could, shoo them off. I could catch them. Not here.
So let's talk about the book. The Wrong End of the Telescope. You're going to read us a little, but let's just talk about the structure first. Mm-hmm. So the book is set in Greece, and it's set at the site of a refugee camp. And a variety of characters have come from mostly the United States, but from different places in order to work with the refugees. Some are career NGO workers, some are people who've answered a call to help. They feel that they need to come there and help. And the narration toggles between two, I guess, viewpoints. There is Mina, who is a Lebanese doctor, who speaks in the first person, and then it's Mina's voice, but in the second, section of the book. How would I say it? No, it's sort of braided, isn't it? So she addresses you in the second person, right? She addresses somebody who remains unnamed, and that person is only ever known as you. So that's how the book is put together, and the chapters fit between the two perspectives. So would you read us a little, and then we'll take it up from there.
Okay, I'm gonna read a little, as in not complete sections, just to give you an idea. And,
yeah.
And if you ask for two, you're gonna get two.
Okay, a flavor.
Exactly. This one is titled The Little Rascals Go to Camp. Sumaiya and her family rode the bus while Emma, Rodrigo, and I followed in the car. Luckily, we decided not to take my Opel this morning. Emma's rental Honda was much more comfortable. In the back seat, I suddenly felt exhausted and sluggish. Drowsiness overwhelmed me. Talking to me through the rearview mirror, Emma suggested that I close my eyes for a bit. It would be at least half an hour before we reached Moria. I fell asleep before she finished her sentence. I dreamt of my mother, of my father, of sitting before them as an adult, all of us underwater in the Mediterranean, something like that, everything fleeting and hollow. I heard strange knocking noises, as if I were in an aquarium with some child knocking on the glass, my head echoing back. And indeed, it was a child who woke me, or rather 5 of them, 4 boys and a little girl, all in clothes that had seen better days if they ever had a good one. The kids stepped back from the car as soon as I turned, all of them giggling. I'd slept for hours, my head leaning against the rear window. I had a text from Emma explaining that she thought it would be best to let me sleep, that I should come to the camp when I woke up and call her. I stretched my arms, used the car's roof as support, which made the children laugh louder. I got out of the car, asking them in Arabic if there was something wrong or if they found me just generally amusing. The eldest boy, no more than 11, clad in a multi-darned sweater, explained that I was snoring loudly. He could hear my snoring through the car window, he said, but not his friend and lieutenant, pointing to a younger boy, because his ears were filthy. His ears had so much dirt, the eldest boy said, that you could grow wheat in them and make bread. The other boy, whose ears did not seem any dirtier than the rest, was not amused. The children asked me where I was from, then introduced themselves. The leader, his lieutenant, and another boy were from the Aleppo area. The 4th boy was all the way from Pakistan and didn't speak Arabic, but he was fun nonetheless. And the blonde girl clad in strident colors was from Iraq and didn't say much because she was shy, but she had to be in the club because the leader's mother would beat him up if he didn't allow girls. And what did their club do? Well, it was formed only this morning, so their objectives are not entirely clear yet, but the main reason for the club's existence was mischief making, as in his mother told him to take his friends and make trouble for other people, not her, if he knew what was best for him. And of course he knew. Could they take me into the camp to meet my friend? Of course they could. And not only that, they would explain things to me, since I was obviously new, but it was going to cost me. No, not money, but a whole chocolate bar. Or 2, since there were 5 of them. And of course they knew I didn't have chocolate on me. I didn't even have a purse, but I could buy candy at one of the cantinas over there, the boys said. The big one, facing the gate, had the best chocolate. The owners had given them 2 bars that morning for picking up all the paper cups and putting them in a garbage bag. Had I ever had coffee out of a paper cup? And it was hours ago since they had chocolate, and there were 5, and it was just 2 bars, and they could tell me all kinds of things about Moria, the camp to my right, not the city in the Lord of the Rings, but they could explain the movie to me if I wanted, so I should buy them chocolate bars. Of course I should. So let's stop this one here. And so this, at the same camp, the narrator meets the unnamed writer, or at least sees him, and then he runs away. So this is a section about that. And it's called You, the Nervous Wreck. You would later say that the incident was your breaking point. You wanted to go back to San Francisco and get a manicure, paint your nails blue, get a massage, get away. You said you ended up in your hotel room in Mytilene, behind a locked door, under the sheets, noise-canceling headphones blasting Christa Ludwig singing Mahler's Kinder Totenlieder. What breaks us is rarely what we expect. I had read the essays you wrote about Syrian refugees in 2012 and 2013. They were one of the reasons I came to this Greek island. You'd be working with refugees in Lebanon since the beginning, years before the crisis in Lesbos. You interviewed children whose entire family were killed, talked to survivors of massacres, met victims of torture. You interviewed a 7-year-old girl who showed you a drawing of the lost home hanging from a parachute. She said the parachute was needed to keep the house safe in case it had gone flying off with no one to look after it anymore. You talked to a mother in Oslo whose son was being beaten on a regular basis by other boys in school. She told you Europe may have once been a sanctuary, but no longer. Europe was like the light of a star that kept going long after the star itself had died. Hell, I remember you wrote about the man who invited you into the tent near Zahle. He was bedridden with the flu and kept smelling a potted sage plant, thinking it a cure. He wouldn't talk to you about what happened to him, even though you could see the bandages around both arms and chest. His son finally whispered that his father was slowly skinned while in the notorious Tadmor prison in Palmyra. A government torturer had spent an entire day peeling layer after layer of his father. That did not break you, but a boy having to leave home to get an education did. The second part.
Thank you. So there's a writer, and the writer does bear, because I know you as well as I do, the writer does bear an uncanny resemblance to one Mr. Rabih Alameddie.
See, I should have had somebody who didn't know me interview me.
Can you talk to me about that?
Sure. You know, I had lots of trouble writing the book. I had worked or basically interviewed Syrian refugees for years, and I wasn't able to write much, primarily because I was so involved. And then what happened to me in Lesbos was sort of double damning, as in I was there and I was torn in multiple ways. I used to say I was torn in two, but no, it was actually much more than that. Because I was sort of more, I identified more with the refugees. I mean, they were my people than the Westerners who were there to help. So it was difficult. So I had to create this, or I didn't have to create it because she was already there, but the character of Mina to come in and actually narrate the novel. But I couldn't get what happened to me out of my head. So it became this combination of what happened to me and what happened to Mina, and sometimes the two are intertwined. But I mean, there are many reasons of doing it, and one of them was for the structure of the novel. I thought the way that I usually work is have different threads going at the same time, and each thread vibrates. It will allow the others to vibrate. I sort of calling the tuning fork, so that what happened, the narrator story and Mina's story and the refugee stories sort of become tuning forks. One will lead the other into tune. And I thought that was the best way of telling this novel. And I hope I was right. I don't know.
Well, it's very effective.
Yeah.
And you know, it comes to a head at the end in ways that I don't want to reveal right now. But I want to talk to you about being both of, you know, being of the same nationality and world as the refugees and also the saviors. But before I do that, I just want to ask you whether you had come across a book called The Shadow of Imana by Véronique Tajon.
No, I have not.
Well, it was very interesting. I reviewed it recently. Well, it was part of something else I was reviewing. She had a new one out, and she's a Senegalese. She's a Cameroonian writer, and she was part of a group who went to Rwanda. Just a little time after the genocide, and 10 writers, poets, artists went in order to create a response to what was going on there, what had gone on there. And she produced something which she called, what I saw anyway, I can't remember whether she said this or maybe it was me, but there's a French genre called un récit de voyage. And it sort of blends, so she blends fiction and she blends non-fiction, and she's present also in the story as the writer. And I was quite strongly reminded of that style when I read The Wrong End of the Telescope.
And the style, I mean, as much as it's not that new, because, you know, Kundera did it a number of times, Cortázar did it in the 60s. And even if in many ways Borges did it even earlier than that, it's the whole idea of, is it memoir, is it fiction, is it, you know, reporting? And I don't like to separate all that, you know.
No, and they shouldn't be separated. But I'm interested to know how it all came together, you know, how that sort of evolution of this is the only way that I can write this book.
Well, the introduction of Mina was basically the sort of spark. I was writing another story that included Mina and her mother and her brother, which they all come into the novel, but it was basically about Mina going to Beirut to confront her mother and her brothers sort of being in between, torn in between. That story didn't work, but it was interesting when I was struggling to write this novel, you know, from a perspective of a writer going to help. It didn't work. It just would not work. I could not get the right distance to see it. But I had the story and I was working on the story on the side, and all of a sudden, that character comes from this story into a novel, and everything falls into place. I mean, it didn't occur to me when I was writing the story. I mean, why was I writing a story in the middle of a novel? That, you know, what I was doing was setting this up. But what happened once Mina jumped from the short story into the novel, everything that I was writing in the novel began to make sense. Whereas it really, really sucked before that.
I know, I get it. I've been there, and it's a wonderful moment. It's just a wonderful moment when clarity arrives.
I could tell you that I worked, you know, for whatever, three years on this novel, and it was a slog. I mean, you know, nothing. And then all of a sudden, you know, boom. And it was done within, you know, 6 months. Like, you know, I had everything.
But did you ever get to the point where you thought this isn't going to work and I've got to put it aside?
Of course, this wasn't going to work. You know, it's like, you know, when, like, I'm always afraid somebody will ask me here, when did you start? How long did it take you? There's a section in this novel that I wrote 22 years ago and published, you know, and it's still stuck in my head for 22 years. And then all of a sudden, oh, you know, and this is what I mean I struggled mightily, but, you know, that happens with every book. And then at one point, something happens.
I don't know which bit you wrote 22 years ago, but let me ask you about that opening scene, which very near the beginning, there's a scene of a baggage carousel, and there's a book on it, and the book is face up or face down. I can't remember. I think as it comes through, it's open, and then somebody waiting for their baggage turns it around to see what the book is, and then it goes through the curtains, and then it comes out the other side, and it's face up again. It's open again, and this game goes on. And I was really tickled by that, because it was such a such a moment of keen observation and humor, you know, and those sort of light touches, even as everybody is gathering in this place to deal with people who are in the direst of circumstances.
I can tell you that I stood in that, you know, moving baggage belt while waiting for my luggage, and it was fascinating to me that there was only this one small plane, and the baggage would not come. They were having a break, so I was there, and I remember waiting, you know, but the book thing was pure invention. It did not happen that way.
Well, it was a beautiful detail to bring us into the book. Let's talk about that arrival and then what happens afterwards. So at one point, just a couple of questions back, you mentioned the experience of of being both associated, affiliated with the refugees, and also coming from the land in which the NGO workers are coming from, and that conflict. And this is something that resonated with me deeply, because, of course, part of my family is from Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone civil war ended in between 2000 and 2002. And that was a period where I spent a lot of time in the country, also writing, but also trying to give succor wherever I could, you know, to help. And I had exactly that experience of being a member of both parties. And I found it very, very difficult, I have to say. I found it very difficult. I found it more difficult being with the NGO workers, actually, because they seemed to be very distanced from what they were doing, you know, and there were many times where I felt that we were tipping into trauma tourism. You know, I met wonderfully dedicated people. I met fantastic people who I've remained friends with for the 20 intervening years, but there were times of deep discomfort to me because, you know, some of my family were part of the refugee, were people who needed help. And at the same time, you know, I was listening to them being spoken about as the other.
And that's what shook me in Lesbos. And it's funny because I always feel that I have to say how wonderful volunteers are. As if, you know, I can't criticize without having to balance it out with that. And yes, most of the volunteers were wonderful. I mean, at the time that I was there, it was the you know, Christmas and New Year holidays. So all these kids had taken time off from school, and instead of, I keep saying, instead of, you know, working for an evil law firm, they decided to come to Lesbos and help. So that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And at the same time, what I found fascinating was this sort of separation between the volunteers and the people they were helping. It was more than just a distance. It was the other. You know, it was looking at the refugees as the other, and the motivation became fascinating to me. And since I belong to both, the motivation of both became interesting. Like, you know, what were the refugees expecting and what were the volunteers expecting? And I noticed that the volunteers wanted what I call to feel better about themselves. So did I when I went there, you know. They wanted to feel that their life had meaning and they're helping, and they wanted to see themselves that way, and they wanted to be seen that way. And that puts a wall between the volunteer and the you know, refugee. And one of the things that is important, and I'll never forget, in the book, it's the gay Palestinian nurse. In real life, for me, it was this Swedish Iranian. I mean, he was an Iranian immigrant to Sweden, who's a relatively famous pop star. And he kept saying, I don't care what people are here for. I can put them to work. Whatever you're here for, I could put you to work. I could, and that's the way that I felt the volunteering should be, like just whatever your reasons, he could put you to work. But it was difficult. It was difficult to see, just to see it. And again, I've seen it the same way, like young people trying to help homeless people in San Francisco. It's wonderful that they're trying to help, but the treatment is always that of someone who feels superior to the one they are helping. And in San Francisco, we're talking, same quote unquote nationality and stuff, but still the person who's helping feels superior to the person being helped. And that's, in some ways the way that it is, except that it comes across, and it is truly, and I kept feeling for the refugees that in many ways it is humiliating. I mean, a lot of these refugees have been humiliated a lot, from the government, from, all the militias, and then coming across and being mistreated there. And then they come to the place where they're supposed to be treated or saved, or at least they think they should. And all of a sudden, they're being treated as cattle or as people who are not welcome, really. But even when by well-meaning people, it's this, again, it's this othering, this that we look at someone else and see that's not us.
Well, it's belittling.
Yes.
And, I saw, in Sierra Leone, I saw enormous tension between the refugee communities and the NGO communities, enormous tension. And actually, at various points, the authorities had to step in to try to stop some of the NGO workers behaving in the way they did, because it was causing so much tension. I mean, it was the big white four-wheel drives rushing through the town, but also, the attitude of the volunteers. And it really, really changed my view of humanitarian assistance. And I'm not sure I agree with your character who says, I don't care what their reasons are, I can put them to work. Because there are plenty of people who do this professionally and do it extremely well, and have learned how to respond in a way that maintains the dignity of the person that they're attempting to help. But the stripping of the dignity to see older people, accomplished people who've had a great experience of the world, treated, by very young Westerners as though they have no agency, they have no mind. I mean, I found it incredibly difficult. And I have always, and everyone I know who works in that sphere, strongly discouraged people going out just to help, right? We say, give money, lobby your government, right? Do, help in some other way, but you don't actually need to show up.
Especially if you don't know the culture. But again, at the same time, it's like they needed hands on the ground. When boats were coming with like 50 boats a day, each with overloaded and stuff, they needed people to help move people. So yes, it volunteering does help, but I don't know what the solution is. I don't know. You said the one word that I felt that the whole book was about, which is dignity. Whether it is Mina or the refugees or the writer, for me, the book is about loss and what we lose, and whether as immigrants or as refugees or as just normal people, when we move, what we lose. But it's the primary thing that I kept looking at is dignity. How do we keep dignity in a world that does not respect us?
Let me ask you about some of your characters, because what we haven't mentioned so far is that Mina is a trans woman.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this was a book about women. right? There were so many female characters. There was Mina and Emma, who's the doctor, her friend. And there was also Sumaiya, am I pronouncing that correctly? Who is a woman in the refugee camp who is extremely unwell and is being treated by the pair of them. And yet, what I loved so much about this book, Rabih, is the dignity that you give your female characters. I mean, they are women who are in difficult circumstances. Mina has suffered greatly because her family had disowned her over her trans status. Sumaiya is dying, Emma is trying to help. But at the same time, you maintain the dignity of these characters all the way through. And what I especially liked was the fact that these women also had good sex and loving partners. Right, they were not put there to suffer and to be not men. And I thought this man likes us.
Oh, please, that goes without saying. And I like you in particular. But no, I mean, one of the things that I was fascinated by is I was really interested in the relationships, that Mina has all these things going, and she goes to Lesbos, although it's not apparent stuff, but probably a lull in her life. It's not a complete midlife crisis, but a lull in her life. But what I was fascinated for me is I wanted to make sure that people understood that it is her, wife who wanted her to go, and that their relationship was really solid, and that her relationship with her brother was really solid. That, and then it is reflected in Sumaiya and, her husband, who, even though like he was completely helpless most of the time, I just loved him. It's like it was. So in reply to your question, I never think about, how do I make my female characters have dignity, as much as, how do I make any character have dignity and life, life on the page. It's amazingly, I look at my female characters and think they're complex. They're just not. Somebody asked me the other day, just not, but like how for an unnecessary woman, how were you able to write about a woman? And it's like, you take a person and you make them fully complex and human.
Well, you'd be surprised how many people don't do it too well.
Well, because,
I often say I don't write male characters. I write characters who happen to be male.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, it's like I don't try to make my characters real as women. I try to make them real. Like same with you. You don't. It's like it's. I would treat any character, or at least my primary characters, the same, which is you have to make them come to life on the page. Otherwise, what the hell is the point?
I mean, you make it sound very straightforward, and of course you are right. And yet, there are so many, not just writers, but just creators of narrative, be it film or theatre or whatever, who fall at that particular challenge. And I think it's, there's an ability that some writers have to really be able to observe the small details of somebody's life, to imagine what it's like to be another person. And the scene that brought it to me most acutely in this wonderful novel is when Sumaiya and her husband are being interviewed by a foreign, 3 journalists, and they keep on addressing the questions to her husband. Right, and she keeps saying in Arabic, what about me? Why aren't you asking me? And they keep on doing this. And then and I think I've got this right, but correct me if I'm wrong, because at some point, they also praise her husband and say, but isn't he wonderful because he cared about his daughter after he reveals the reasons that they left Syria. They say, oh, but he's so wonderful. And then they say, one of them says, well, because these people don't care about their daughters. And I thought this was just a wonderful, wonderful telling of the complexity of, of sexism, of othering, of, all that women in her position put up with. And then there's another moment with Mina, or is it Emma, where, I think it's Emma, where she's being talked over again. Am I right? Is it Mina or is it Emma?
It's actually Francine.
It's Francine.
Yes.
And she's being talked over by a man constantly until she gets really irritated about it. And I thought that was just but that first scene with, had so many layers of complexity in it. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, and actually, I hate to say it, but I've seen it so many times where, as an example, like for a lot of people, I've seen in many reviews that when they're talking about an unnecessary woman, they blame her loneliness on the patriarchal culture of Lebanon, as if the culture over here is not.
Yes, I know, isn't it something?
It's amazing to me. It truly, truly, truly is astounding. Somebody just not on to review this book, she said that the woman left Lebanon because trans women don't exist in Lebanon, even though in the novel itself there are at least 3 trans women who exist in the area. One, I mentioned it. One became the receptionist for a gay rights organization. The other one was press in Raqqa and stuff. But for them, they just don't see it. It becomes like them over there. And this thing where it is said that, they don't love their daughters over there. I've heard more than once.
Oh, I've heard it about Sierra Leone as well. I've heard it about Sierra Leone, about the education of girls because they don't love their daughters.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And now I just lost the thought that I had. Oh, I know. I think it's because, it could be sort of cultural, but it's also generational, because I also have to explain sometimes to my students, or I tell my students, that actually in West Africa, at least Sierra Leone, which I know particularly well, there has existed for centuries a way for a woman to become a man and live as a man if she so wishes, right? For centuries. And it's called becoming a mambore. And you give up life as a woman and you embrace life as a man, and that is centuries and centuries old. So
no, it's truly.
It may be generational. I think we've got to be a bit forgiving when someone thinks they've invented, a generation thinks they invented something.
This is what I mean. This is what I mean by the othering. So it's not exactly just volunteers. It's everybody wanting to feel superior. I have heard so often that in the Arab world they are terrible with homosexuals, they're terrible with women, which is probably true, but it's not like this place is better. But it's shocking to most people that there are gay rights organizations that are open. We have gay bars and everything. It's not but people still see it, and they in their mind they think that it's the Middle Ages back there. Seriously, sometimes I had to explain, we do have running water. We do have, I wouldn't say we do have electricity, although right now, because
yeah. I can't claim that too often. We have like an hour a week. No. But there are places in America that don't have electricity, so.
So true.
No, not everyone's living on the set of Dallas or Dynasty. Now, I'm going to throw a question at you, and then I'm going to let you answer it while I take a look at the questions. Because right at the beginning of this novel is written, memory is a wound, you said. and some things are released only by the act of writing. Unless I go in with my scalpel and suction to excavate, to clean, to bring into the light, that wound festers and the gangrene of decay will eat me alive. Now, if that was an exam question, I would say discuss. But what I'd like to do is ask you if that is, I know that that's your character speaking, of course, but I'd like to know if you agree with that character.
Yes and no. Yes and no. And again, the character speaking, obviously, the metaphors of gangrene and scalpel and stuff is because the character is a surgeon. Do I believe it? Lots of people are able to suppress and go on with their life. I'm not one of them. I think it affects, and all the studies on PTSD sort of show that unless we bring to the surface to be able to sort of, there's a stab wound or a prick, and unless you bring it to the surface, you can never remove that. But for writers, is it, do I believe it? Yes. You can, anybody can write and everybody can, there are all kinds of ways of approaching books. One of the trouble I have, and especially now that I'm teaching, is that a lot of writers or young writers don't know themselves very well. So that they're shocked when it appears on the page who they are, and they can't tell, but a good reader can. And I find that fascinating. So that I think a writer has to do some, for lack of a better word, inner work of finding out why I write the way that I do, or why I avoid certain subjects. But the other thing again is otherwise you're writing about things that don't matter to anybody.
Yeah. Sometimes when I'm teaching a short, intense course, like it's a week long and it's open to the public, I do say to people, this is not therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I have once had somebody get up and leave and come to me afterwards and say, I'm so glad you said that, because I realized when you said it that what I wanted was therapy. And I think you're absolutely right. You have to have done the work on yourself first, because you can't unload on the page. Right.
That's exactly that.
You can't unload on the page.
No.
So you have to have figured out quite a lot before you begin to write, I think. But I don't think that writing necessarily brings me comfort.
No.
But I do think, not at all. In fact, actually, it can make everything so much worse. My agent once said to me, "Oh, you're all mad," and I said, "It makes us mad. It makes us mad." But I do think this: I write to figure stuff out, right? And the figuring of stuff out, even if I figure it out, and the answer that I get isn't necessarily a positive one, I figure out that actually people are awful or whatever, at least I figured it out, right? At least I figured it out. So let's take a question here.
Well, let me add one thing. For me, one of the things that I always said is that I go to therapy to work out problems exacerbated by my writing.
Yeah, well, let that be a lesson to some of our listeners. Now, Leila Amel Lababi says, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Lababi or Lababi, one of many things you do so brilliantly is use structure and voice in unexpected ways to tell stories. I, the Divine is a great example of this, and your new book, which I have not read yet but have bought, apparently does the same. You talked about your personal experiences and needing distance to see more clearly. I've always wondered whether your talents and experience as a painter play into how you see stories when you write. Does your eye for visual art shape in any way how you write?
Yes. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you exactly how it shapes it. I mean, I definitely, because I have painted, I definitely see the world a little differently. However, I also played soccer for years and years and years, and I think that helped shape my world. I am 61, almost 62, and that helped me shape everything. For a writer, and you know this as well as anybody, for a writer, everything shapes what we write. Everything I do, everything I am, everything that I have encountered at one point or another, it influences how I write. So yes, obviously. But I can't tell, oh, this influenced my ability to do this. I mean, I've always thought, I studied engineering in college. I was a good mathematician, and that allows me to see the novel spatially and stuff. But again, I can't quantify what that is. But the distance to me is the big thing. I mean, to be able to have the right kind of distance from what I'm writing about is a big, big thing. I've said this many times. If I am writing about my family, for example, if I am too enmeshed in my family, I cannot see them correctly. If I am too distant, I cannot see them correctly. So there is what I call a Goldilocks distance, which is just the right distance for me, and yours could be a little different, but just the right amount of distance where I am in and able to see it, and I am out and able to see it without being too involved. And that was the problem with the book. So for me, that distance is the biggest thing, and this is what I mean by, if you have to know yourself a little bit, because sometimes, you're writing about your country, and all the emotions that you feel about it come across, and they're completely jumbled, and you can't pull them apart because you don't have the correct distance.
I'm going to take the next two questions together, because I think one is probably a little more straightforward to answer than the other. The first one is, what message or meanings would you like the reader to take away from your novel? And then the next one is, why do you think Mina brought the story together for you?
What message?
That's a tough one.
It's not just a tough one. It's fascinating, because I wouldn't put it that way. I mean, I knew this wonderful writer, Lynn Freed, who taught for years and years and years and years. And all her students talk about, she goes through a story when she's reading, and she goes, message, message, message. When message is the big thing, it becomes didactic fiction, which none of us are interested in. What message? There is no message.
Rabih, let's put it another way, because what I often think about when I get asked that question, I usually say something. What I'm doing is I'm asking people to think about certain things.
Yes, and that what I'm asking people to think about is how we other. How we think of someone or some culture or as different than us, and where does that difference come? In this book, it's the intersection sort of East and West. It's the intersection of male and female. It is the intersection of different modernism versus none. And the narrators, most of them, straddle these things, whether it's the writer or Mina. So I'm interested. What I hope a reader can get is to look at the world differently, to be able to see differently. I mean, I always say what I want with every book is to change the world, and I fail all the time. But it's the striving that makes the journey interesting, knowing that I'm going to fail.
But change one reader and change 10 readers, change 100 readers for a while. It's an accumulative thing, in the way that you can't exactly describe how everything that you are and everything that you have done in your life translates onto your novels. You also can't extrapolate out of the novel what the resonances are for the wider world and the readership. But It's kind of interesting because it brings us onto this question. I'm going to bring you back to the question about Mina in a minute.
I remember.
This question about reading and empathy, because at a point in the book, there's this discussion, which is where the writer's basically having a kind of existential crisis about writing. And
not that I've ever had any.
Well, a friend of mine, so writing has been proven to create empathy, right? Now, reading literature has been proven to create empathy in the reader. But the discussion has sort of moved on into what form of empathy it creates. And this sort of takes us back to some of those volunteers that we find problematic. A friend of mine who's a war correspondent, he calls some of what we see narcissistic empathy. And he says it's the war reporter who has to go and hug the refugee and show, and I thought narcissistic empathy was actually rather a good way of describing it. So what we want to create as writers is real empathy, but not narcissistic empathy.
I usually want to say when I'm being rational, and what I want to create is for a brief period of time to be able to see differently. To be able to see the world differently. How long that lasts is wonderful. But the wonderful writer, Namwele Serpel, wrote this essay about empathy, and she basically said that, empathy without some form of action becomes meaningless in the end. But for me, the whole idea of seeing the world differently, that seeing other possibilities, and that's what we're lacking these days. Is in my opinion a failure of imagination. We have a poverty of imagination. We can't seem to think outside of the world that we're bombarded with.
Now let me take you back to that question, which was the other one. Why do you think Mina brought the story together for you?
For many reasons. Mina was sort of the distance that I needed, but it was particularly her character. I needed somebody who would not fall apart with the same way that I did when faced with the same challenges. And it's been interesting, like I said, that everybody is noticing the fact that Mina is a trans woman, which is really important for the book. But the fact that Mina was a surgeon, to me, made her a better storyteller than I am. Because in my mind, I can imagine a surgeon having to, go through this, like the scene with the Western reporters saying that they don't love their daughters over there. The brother's reaction would have been mine, going like, Mina's reaction is a more constrained one. I mean, she feels all that, but she knows how to put it aside. So I created this character, even though it's just a character, but it allowed me to be able to put some things aside and deal with writing the book.
In The Memory of Love, which is my book set in the Sierra Leone civil conflict, I have a surgeon character.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it was, I probably saw much of the same that you saw, which is there are certain people with certain skills who can operate in a certain environment. And what I envied about the surgeons and the doctors in general was that they had something they could do, right? I could go off and think about it and vex about it and write about it, but they had this very concrete way of being able to assist. And I think that does. Absolutely. And there's a reason that character came to you and brought it together in that way. Now, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask you two more questions. I'll save the best for last, but here's another quote from the book. You live in a safe place, and yet you consider the world so dangerous. Now, we're talking about America. Let's discuss this, because you and I are both, I'm a very recent arrival in America. I view my stay as temporary, but I've been here 6 years now. You, of course, have been here a lot longer. And I was just wondering about that, because I regard, somebody has written, Deborah Kelly has written, safe ? Exclamation mark in chat. Yeah, I regard, I see exactly that. So, no, hang on, what do I see? most Sierra Leoneans I know regard the West as extremely dangerous. Right, they think it's a very dangerous place to be, and often say, no, you can't go outside and play. We're not in Sierra Leone now. So there is this kind of, and so that quote touches on it. You live in a safe place, and yet you consider the world so dangerous, because actually I find people here very unnerved, and I find myself often unnerved too.
Yes, and it is a lot of the problems with who we project our evil intents onto. I have never been in a culture that is so afraid of everybody else as much as in this country. And whether it is because of advertising or TV shows or whatever, but it is amazing to me that so many people are assigned so much fear and evil intent to other people. It's like I would pass by, right next to my house is a soccer field where a lot of kids play. If I was in Lebanon, I would sit down and watch. Over here, I start worrying what these parents will think if there is a man going to watch little kids play. I mean, it is one of the joys of life to watch kids play. Over here, if you do that, you are an evil person who
you would be arrested.
I would, exactly. It is amazing to me that, don't take candy from strangers. Like, why not?
Yeah, well, I know a man here who's been apprehended by the police while taking his own daughter to the park.
Yes.
And watching her play.
Yes. It is amazing to me.
But those dangers do exist. So it's
well, here's the thing. They do exist. Do they exist to the amount of hysteria that is associated with it? See, it's like if you look at the percentage of people who get killed because of that, it is a very small percentage, yet everybody I know is worried about oh my God, what's going to happen. And then unfortunately what begins to happen is that if you're worried about evil comes knocking. It's like if you're worried about people going crazy and shooting people, it starts happening. It's not, and I'm not talking about calling. It's like that's when people start believing that something bad is going to happen, those that seek attention will do something bad because they know that it will attract attention.
So I have one last question. We've got 1 minute left. I have one last question for you. This is the most important one of the night. Harold Robbins?
Yes.
And did that take me back, or did it take me back? And then I got some other names.
Jackie.
So the viewers know there's a bit in the book where it talks about the writer talks about what he started reading and was reading obsessively when he was young, and it was Harold Robbins. And I thought, oh my God, yes, Harold Robbins, Judith Krantz, Jackie Collins, Sidney Sheldon.
Jacqueline Suzanne.
Oh yeah, Jacqueline Suzanne. Yeah.
Again, this is one of the most amazing things, and this is what I mean by people are so afraid. I was reading what was available, what my mother was reading, whatever, and they really got me into reading, and it was, like I said, I was 14 and 12 and 13 and 14, and there is nothing better than reading about sex and those.
At school, that's what we read. I would say that the years from, 12 or 13 through to 15, 16 was just all pot boilers.
Yep. And again, I'll never remember this writer who I'm known as a bit of a snob when it comes to reading. They wanted to introduce me to I can't remember his name, the guy who wrote The Day of the Jackal.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And anyway, the writer was shocked that I went, oh my God. Like, when I was a kid, these writers of whether, pot boilers or, Robert Ludlum and The Bourne Identity or whatever, all those books were like, the most amazing things.
That's what surrounded us.
Yes.
Look, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed it so much, Rabih.
Thank you so much for having
me. You're so near. I hope you're going to come and visit soon. And now let's welcome back Bashan to exit us from this fabulous conversation.
Well, on behalf of Politics and Prose, I'd like to thank you both for this wonderful discussion. And of course, also like to thank everyone who's tuned in to join us. Don't forget to go to the chat section, click on the link, buy a copy or two, make a good gift for someone. On behalf of Politics and Prose, once again, thank you all. And that's for everyone out there, stay well and stay well read. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks so much,
Thank
everybody.
you, everybody.
Take care.